Why did George Lucas choose to begin with child Anakin Skywalker? Surely he could have started with his teenage years, or maybe even a little older than where we saw him in The Phantom Menace. Well, the answer comes from the making of The Phantom Menace. And when George sat down to write Episode 1, one of the biggest creative decisions that he faced was how to introduce Anakin Skywalker, because after all, that's how he got the idea for Star Wars in the first place back in the 70s. He thought of the idea, should he begin as a young man, already a warrior, already close to the fall, or should he start with a boy? And George, of course, chose the boy. It's still one of the most controversial choices in Star Wars today, and one of the most misunderstood, and I hope that this video will bring light to that so you can tell your friends who ever talk about it, maybe negatively. Now, in the making of The Phantom Menace, George explained that he wanted audiences to see who Darth Vader used to be. Not the mask, not the machine, but the person underneath it. The innocent child who would one day become the most feared man in the galaxy. The idea was to show that Darth Vader was not born evil, George said. He's not a monster. He's a good kid who loves his mom and wants to help people, but he's pulled into circumstances beyond his control. George said he wanted the first prequel to feel like a story about hope and promise, because that's what tragedy needs before it falls apart. You have to start with light before you can go into darkness. The first film is about joy and discovery, the wonder of life. You have to love Anakin before you can hate what he becomes. That's what separates The Phantom Menace from the other Star Wars films. It's not a war movie. It's about innocence and how easily it can be manipulated. George explained that starting with a young Anakin was critical to understanding his destiny as the chosen one. He says, "The prophecy says he will bring balance to the Force, but balance can go both ways. It's not about destroying evil, it's about how good and evil can coexist." Anakin doesn't understand that yet. He's too young. This is why Qui-Gon Jinn's role is so important. George described Qui-Gon as the father figure Anakin needed, the one who sees him as more than a tool of the Jedi Council. Qui-Gon represents the compassion and independence the Jedi have lost. He sees Anakin's potential not as a weapon, but as a miracle. Qui-Gon believes in the living Force, in intuition. In the here and now, he sees Anakin as the will of the Force made flesh. The Council sees him as a problem. By making Anakin a child, George made his fall more tragic, because we see everything that he loses. His innocence, his mother, his freedom. And when he finally turns in Revenge of the Sith, we remember that little boy, the one who said goodbye to his mother, promising, "I will come back and free you, Mom." That's not a monster, that's a child making a promise that he'll never fulfill. George said that if he had started Anakin as a teenager or adult, the audience wouldn't have understood the full scope of his loss. You wouldn't have felt the tragedy, he explained. You have to see the whole journey, from innocent boy to fallen man, for it to mean anything. And that's the heart of the prequels. It's not about how Anakin becomes Vader, it's about why he becomes Vader. His fall isn't about power, it's about fear. The fear of losing the people that he loves. That's why George insisted on showing him at his most vulnerable age, a boy with a huge heart, surrounded by masters who misunderstand him, and by a galaxy that rewards control instead of compassion. The Jedi think they're helping him, George said, but they're teaching him to suppress what makes him human. From that moment, his fate is sealed. The Phantom Menace isn't just Anakin's beginning, it's the moment the galaxy seals its own doom. The Jedi take the boy who represents life and try to turn him into a tool of order. Palpatine sees the same boy and molds him through love and fear. And when you see that, you realize that George wasn't telling a story about space battles or trade disputes. He was telling the oldest story in mythology, how innocence, when confronted with control and fear, becomes corruption. Now, in this case, the control in Anakin's life was everyone around him, whether it was Watto or the Jedi or then the Sith. He was always being controlled, and most of all, by his own fears. Anakin's story is not about good and evil, George says. It's about love, and how love can be twisted. So the next time you guys watch The Phantom Menace, remember that George Lucas didn't start with a warrior or a fallen hero, he started with a boy, because he wanted you to mourn what that boy would become. And that's why he began with a child Anakin Skywalker, which I know is super controversial and has been for years, ever since 1999 when The Phantom Menace came out. Funny enough, I was 9 years old when it came out, so for me, I really dug it because I was like, oh yeah, I'm Anakin Skywalker. Cool. And then we got to see really what became of him through episode 2 and episode 3. I could talk about this stuff for hours. I find it the most fascinating, really. The first 6 films for me it's just so fun to go into and dive into and learn why George made certain decisions by reading these making of books. I think they're absolutely priceless. And from a movie making or telling perspective and writing perspective, it is worth its weight in gold, I would say, to read these books, or at least hopefully to watch these videos and my takes on them. Hopefully it makes you think a little bit and see the films a little differently and what George was really going for. Thanks so much for watching. If you want any merch, go to theorysabers.com or any sabers of your choice. We have all the exclusive fonts that you could imagine that really makes the experience very different. Hope you all have a fantastic day. Leave a like on this video and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, remember, the Force will be with you, always.
Now, fulfill your destiny.